Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hello everyone. Welcome back to Sufi Ibrahim Krebs YouTube channel. Should be by now one of your favorites before Fox News, CNN, Epoch Times, Netflix. Check in every week. Usually we do it on Thursday evening, and it should be out by Friday morning at the latest, so check it out. This week is going to be a special request of a client of mine who was intrigued by my trajectory, especially given the fact what's going on in the Middle East, and everyone is lining up on one side or the other, on the Israeli side or on the Palestinian side. I won't say Hamas because that would be a serious mistake, but on the Palestinian right side. And so he thought my story is intriguing because I was raised as a secular Jew and I became a Muslim, 78, at the age of 31. Okay, or 32, 31. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And to be honest, it's been difficult at times, but I've never regretted that choice. Difficult because, and we'll get there, but as people are becoming aware of now, and I think it's good, there are a number of positive things about what's going on in the Middle East. One of them is that this endemic anti-Semitism in the Muslim community is being outed. Okay, so we can see it all over the place. They say they're anti-Israeli, but when you scratch the surface, you get to anti-Semitism. And this is a problem in the Muslim community. Believe me, I've been involved for 45 years, and this is a reality. And Muslims largely need education. So you have two representatives, for example, in America, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who are expressing the social conditioning anti-Semitism in the Muslim community. I'm sad to say it, but it's the reality. Okay, it's been difficult for me at times, but it doesn't put into question my Islamic faith, because anytime I hear this stuff, I go back to the original sources, and I know that anti-Semitism is not part of Islam. It's not part of the Quran. It's not part of the Sunnah of our Prophet. Our Prophet, peace be upon him, he never fought in a terrorist way the way Hamas is doing, for example. Hamas has broken all the rules of Islamic warfare. And I'm sure they have their justifications, but the real justification is it's not really Islam, it's Islamism, which is a subject for another day, although I think I've already spoke about it a few times, but we can talk at some later day of Islamism. By the way, I was very pleased to hear from an old Naqshbandi colleague of mine who was talking about Sheikh Nazim when he spoke with Ikhwan Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood. He said to the people, I hadn't heard this before, but it's exact. He said, these aren't Ikhwan Muslimin. These are not the brothers of the Muslim nation. He said, these are of Muslims. These are Ikhwan Shayateen. They're the brothers of Shaitan. And unfortunately, the Muslims can't denounce them for whatever reason, for maybe because of their ethnic conditioning, but they have to be denounced because they're not Islamic at all. That's not the way our Prophet fought wars. And he fought wars against, or battles against the Jewish tribes. Never killed women, never killed children, never killed babies, never killed anyone unnecessarily. Okay, that's our Holy Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as they say. And peace and blessings upon him. Okay, getting sidetracked a bit by all the heated discussions around the Middle East situation. Okay. So what my client was asking me is, why don't you write about your life trajectory, how you came from secular Judaism to Islam, to being a Muslim. Okay, and it's a long story. And I eventually hope to write a book, my autobiography. But today, what I want to cover is just the shift into Islam. Okay? My whole life story is going to be organized around shifts. Okay, from one perspective to another. Unfortunately, most people never make any shifts. Existential, philosophical, deep shifts. Most people just stay in the same way their entire life. So I'm realizing it's quite a while ago, 10 years back, we had the 50th anniversary, that's how old I am, the 50th anniversary of our graduation from high school. And I met my classmates there, and I can tell you there is not a single one of them where he made any serious shift in his life. He's still, I say mostly he because we were kind of separated, gender separation in those days. So I had much less interaction with the ladies. It wasn't like nowadays. But not one of them. I figured someone would become a Hasid or an Orthodox Jew or something, that you wouldn't have expected. They're all on the same track. And when I meet my old colleagues from the Marxist movement and the socialist movement, almost everyone's still on the same track, same philosophy, never questioned, never shifted. Okay, this has not been my way. So I've gone through numerous shifts. I was trying to think about all the different ones. I'll mention them quickly, but what we're going to talk about today is the last major shift that transformed my life. Okay. So my first shift, I was raised as a kind of Trudeau-esque liberal in my family. That's what my parents believed in, the Liberal Party of Canada. The first shift was to become more of a socialist under a friend of mine who later worked for the NDP party. Shifting from liberal to socialist, then from socialist to Marxist. Then I had a girlfriend I might have mentioned before that accused me of being a positivist, in other words, an empiricist, and I shifted from positivism to internal experience, what the French call intériorité, rather than empiricism. And then from Marxism, which is also a form of empiricism, I moved into humanistic psychology. And from humanistic psychology into universal spiritual practice with Pir Vilayat Khan. And from universal spiritual practice into Islam. So many different shifts in perspective, that I went through. And actually I converted to Islam in 1978. So I've been 45 years, in case people accuse me of being too flitty or too changeable, etc. I've been in this way for 45 years. It's a pretty good record. Most marriages don't last that long, so no matter how long the people live. Okay. So I've settled in. That doesn't mean I haven't looked around, and even while I was a Muslim Sufi, I went to visit ashrams in India, and I studied Qigong, and I did Buddhist meditation, especially mindfulness. So I keep learning from other traditions. But basically, I've been a Muslim Sufi since 1978. How did I get there? Okay, so before I converted, I was with a group under Pir Vilayat Khan. It was called the Sufi Order of the West. And the Sufi Order of the West was very universalist. We did practices from Buddhism, from Judaism, from Christianity, from Hinduism, from everything, from yoga. We did it all. But at some point, most of us realized that we needed something more. It wasn't enough. It was like a smorgasbord of religious practice, and it wasn't substantial enough. So I decided I was going to go to India. That's where people in my days went for spiritual development. And we had a scheduled trip, and my sincere intention was to go into the Himalayas and stay there for the year. I took a sabbatical from my medical practice, stay there for the year in the higher Himalayas and just meditate. A bit like maybe what Ram Dass tried to do at one point in time. That was my intention. Sitting in my office, I still remember it, in Montreal, Plateau, Montreal, Henri Julien Street, for those who know the area. And I get a call from the organizer of this trip. So I'm planning to go to India and go up in the Himalayas. And the lady who's organizing it, or one of the organizers, calls me up and she says, Dr. Krebs, I have some bad news. Okay. What's the bad news? India's flooded everywhere. The people who are planning this trip, they had to be rescued by Indian Army helicopters. It was that bad. The airport was closed in New Delhi and Bombay. You can check this up. 1978 in the autumn. I said, what am I going to do? She said, look, I'm really sorry, but there's nothing we can do about it. She said, maybe next year we'll do the same trip. Okay. So here I'm stuck in Montreal, scheduled, canceled all my practice for a year, and I'm lost. So I said, well, let's start heading out towards India anyway. Maybe this will resolve itself. First stop, London. Okay, when I stopped in London, this was before there were 1978. No internet, no Google, none of this. I'm trying to find out what's going on in India. And they were still using telegrams at the time. So they had some kind of telegraphs at the Indian Embassy in London. Every day I would go to the Indian Embassy in London and find what's going on in India. It was the only way I could find out. You know, again, there's no Google, no Chrome, no Firefox, nothing. And the floods were getting worse and worse. So I said, can't go to India straight away. I went to Sweden. I had some old friends from a previous sabbatical in Sweden, and I went to their house. I stayed with them, and a news program came on. And it was a documentary, not really news like now. A documentary about Jerusalem and Israel and Palestine, not really a political one, a spiritual one. And then the light went off. Aha! Can't get to India? Jerusalem's an interesting place. There's Judaism, which was my original religion, Christianity, Islam. Let me go to Jerusalem. So, changed my whole ticket all around, and which wasn't easy even in those days, but we had travel agents who were creative, and I go to Jerusalem. When I go to Jerusalem, the first place I go, based on where I came from, was a Jewish yeshiva run by Orthodox rabbis. And it didn't take me too long to realize that this was not my place. I ran up against this whole notion of the chosen people again and dismissing everyone else, and it wasn't my cup of tea. I didn't like it. So I looked around, and there were some Christian sites in Jerusalem. I don't know if any of you have been to the Christian sites in Jerusalem, but it's really quite unimpressive, to be honest. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I didn't feel anything really Christian going on there. Maybe now it's different. I'm not even sure I got to Bethlehem, but in Jerusalem I didn't feel any real Christianity. So I had the name of a sheikh in East Jerusalem. His name was Muhammad Jamal. And I said, well, let me check this out. It was the last religion I really accepted to study, because like most Westerners, I had a lot of biases against Islam, and I didn't know anything about Islam really. And I said, okay, let me check out this sheikh in East Jerusalem. Well, of course, those of you who know that area, there are no addresses. I couldn't find my way there. But I met a nice Arab man who had spent time in USA, and he spoke English well. He said, oh, Sheikh Mohammed, sure, come. So he led me to the Sheikh's Zawiya, which is like an ashram in Sufism, and I sat down, and the Sheikh wasn't there. Okay, because this sheikh was a qadi. He was a judge in the Islamic civil court in the West Bank. So at the time, I don't know how it is now, in Israel, the criminal justice system was under the Israelis, but they allowed, which even Canada and the United States don't, they allowed Sharia court for the civil cases of Muslims. Okay, interesting point. Anyway, he was a very special guy. His story, what he told us, Allah knows, is that he was wandering around. He's Syrian originally, as far as I could make out. He was wandering around in the desert, and the prophet Aaron, Harun, came to him and said, get to East Jerusalem quickly, because this was in the mid-60s, I think, or early 60s, because soon you won't be able to go there. Okay? This was before the 67 war, and after the 67 war, it was almost impossible for Arabs to get into Jerusalem. So he got in before that, and he was in Jerusalem, and he was working for peace. But when I got there, he wasn't there. So, and his son was there, and his son spoke pretty good English. He said, oh, my brother, very warm, welcome. My brother, you're interested in Islam? Let me tell you about two great Islamic personalities. I said, sure, tell me. He said, Muammar Gaddafi and Idi Amin Dada, also known as the Butcher of Kampala, because he killed so many people in Uganda when he was the head. And then my heart started beating, woo, really, really quick. I said, this is crazy. This is crazy. I wanted to run out. But there was a little voice in the back, don't be too impulsive. Just sit around and wait to meet the father. So he was going on about Idi Amin Dada and about Muammar Gaddafi. I knew they were bad actors. And he was even going on, he was saying, if I were Moshe Dayan, who was one of the Israeli generals, I would be a lot tough. He's an Arab. I'd be a lot tougher on the Arabs than what Moshe Dayan was. He was pretty much of a crackpot. He later got into trouble in the United States for criminality and then reformed himself. But that's a whole other story. So we're talking for a while, and then finally the sheikh comes in. Whew, okay. I say, Sheikh, your son was telling me, don't listen to my son. Don't listen to my... I said, how come? He said, he's in adolescent rebellion. I said, I didn't know you had this in the Arab world, like in the West. Oh yeah, my son, he's a bad egg. He's all mixed up. He said, what do you want to know about? And I said, well, actually, I'd really like to know about Sufism. I heard you're a Sufi teacher. He said, yes. And he started speaking about Sufism. Oh yes, okay. We'll get to that in a minute. But before, let's do it this way. So he starts talking to me about Sufism, but of course, being a Westerner, I had researched Sufism quite a bit. I'd read a lot of stuff. I knew all the basic ideas, and I was kind of like twiddling my thumbs, metaphorically speaking, because I knew everything he was saying theoretically. Okay, and so he gave me a speech, and I looked around the Zawiya, and I said, okay, and I listened politely, and then I left, and I started walking up the road to the Mount of Olives, and it hit me like Paul on the road to Damascus. Really, it hit me, but not like Paul seeing Jesus. I didn't see, but I felt Allah. Suddenly, my whole consciousness was taken over by divine consciousness, and all I could feel was love. Universal love for everyone. For Jews, for Christians, for Muslims, for animals, for plants, for stones. Just flowing in and out. Love. Universal love. And I said, wow. Something's going on here. This guy knows what he's talking about. His words have meaning. His words have impact. So I said to myself, I was staying at a hotel, I think at the time, I got to go back there. So when I come back, one of his murids is this English lady, and she's in full bloom jaundice. Now, my biggest fear in going east to India was to get hepatitis, because I knew people who got hepatitis in India, they never fully recover. So I was completely paranoid about hepatitis. And I looked at her and I said, Zahra was her name. I said, Zahra, you have hepatitis. She said, oh, okay, that's what it is. She said, don't worry, Ibrahim. If Allah wants you to get hepatitis, you'll get it too. Just to calm me down. Of course, I ran up the top of the road. I bought the biggest jar of Dettol, disinfectant you could find, and I came back to the Zawiya and I cleaned up everything and I quarantined her. This was before COVID, and I quarantined her and I washed everything with Dettol and set up separate quarters so I could stay there for a while. So we get tested on this way. And a few days later, I did my shahada. I said, there's just too much going on here. This is where I'm meant to be. Okay. So one of the keys here is you have to be able to break with your conditioning. My conditioning was not pro-Islamic at all, on any level, but you have to be able to break with your conditioning and see the ayat, the signs of Allah, where He is moving you towards. And without bragging, I think I've been pretty good at feeling when Allah is saying, you got to shift, you got to move elsewhere. So I shifted. I took my shahada, I started my Islamic practice, and I really never looked back. Now, one of the events that happened at the same time is I met a couple of lovely Americans. Well, actually, the woman was American, the man was Dutch. And I said to him, how long have you been with the Sheikh? And he said, oh, I've been with him for a year or two. And I say, what have you learned? And he said, I learned to appreciate Islam as well as Sufism, because we were all spiritual seekers, not religious seekers. And he said, I've learned to appreciate the value of the Islamic tradition, which I had no idea about what that meant. But I thought that was intriguing at first, that he had managed to go into the mysticism and see also the basis of the Sharia. One of the first teachings we received with Sheikh Mohammed was in this way, and it stayed with me all this time, in this way we walk on two legs, the Haqiqah and the Sharia. Now the Haqiqah is the deep mystical truth, but the Sharia, which has a bad name because a lot of bad people use that term, but the Sharia is also important, the divine commandments, the rules, and so Haqiqah and Sharia, which you can translate as divine orders, divine commandments. Over the last few years, to give you an example of what isn't that, I spent quite a bit of time in Trinidad. I was hoping to retire there, but that's a whole other story. And in the Caribbean, you'll find a lot of people who really have a love for religion and a love for God, but they have no Sharia. So you'll find a Christian who's sleeping with his friend's wife or a minister's wife or this kind of thing, and you say, but that's not part of Sharia. You don't say Sharia because they don't understand Sharia, but you say that's not part of Christianity. Oh yeah, I know, I love Jesus, I love the church, I love prayers, but I need my carnal pleasures. That's not religion. Okay, it's almost worse to love your religion but keep breaking the commandments. I'm not trying to get down on Christians, but I also had an interaction with a Christian pastor who was the pastor of two of my children, and I said to him, they're not behaving well. Don't you teach them to honor your father and your mother? Because that's part of the Ten Commandments. Honor thy father and thy mother. And he answered me, "Oh, the 10 Commandments are fine, but what counts is relationship." This is how far some of the Christians have strayed. Not all of them. There are people. What was that Catholic from Chicago? Ripperger. If anyone wants to look up a real Christian, look up Frere Brother Ripperger. He understands that the commandments are also important. Sharia and Hakika. Good behavior and mystical understanding. That's the path I've been tracing for the last 45 years. Still working on it, even at my very advanced age. You know, it never ends. Working at the deeper mystical reality and the issue of character. Our Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "I've come to help people perfect their character." Akhlaq is the Arabic word. Have to perfect our character. The Hamas people would do well to try to understand that. They'd have to reform their lives completely to do that. But the real Muslim way is the way of realization and character. And I hope everyone could see that, and then they would see Islam in a much more positive light than a lot of the nastiness going on right now in the contemporary world. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, salamun wa mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Al-Fatiha.